It is interesting that in Einstein's block model of the universe, all past, present, and future instances exist simultaneously in space-time, even if the observers cannot share the same simultaneity of any instance. This all-at-once view of reality is the residue and not the reason behind Einstein's relativistic framework for physics. However, the observer imposes a point of view, and if you add the Copenhagen interpretation into the mix, the observer even creates the reality he observes. Immanuel Kant got to this understanding long before other physicists. Kant's transcendental philosophy proposes an a priori basis for our empirical understanding of reality. That is a mental template that exists prior to and independent of experience, into which all experience is poured. Infinity is the residue of this template, in that it is a manifestation of reality's metaphysical nature that cannot be rendered into coin. To have knowledge of the world, we must pay this price. Kant called this metaphysical side of the ledger the unknowable thing in itself, and it is cut off from all discussion. Arthur Schopenhauer perhaps understood the implications of Kant's philosophy better than Kant. Kant's thing in itself was not a bug, but the key feature of what was left behind on the drawing board. Consequently, one could argue that transcendental idealism has been better at explaining what science cannot know rather than what can be known about reality. For example, transcendental idealism explains how, when we get in a spaceship, we can reach no edge of the universe. This is because infinity is not a property of what is out there, but what is in here. We carry infinity with us wherever we go as a transcendental template. The double slit paradox and quantum entanglement that arises from quantum physics presents the same problem from the opposite direction. An observer is needed to affect these outcomes because finiteness, or things in themselves, such as quantum effects, are also constructions drawn out of the transcendental template. Did life emerge from inert matter? No. Is consciousness derived from matter? No. Once mind and matter are separated for the purposes of asking questions, the thing in itself has been lost. That is, the metaphysical essence upon which the transcendental interface sits and makes intelligible all reality cannot be had. We are doomed to fail because we falsely think that things are the foundation of reality. So what then is reality if it is not things? That is what Omar intends to outline in his coming letters.
Dear Grasshopper, something lies undivided in our ancient memory, something so true it cannot find earth pure enough in which to plant itself. Man, cursed and blessed to remember it, toils in the stony soil to make a heaven of his earth, but reaps only endless duality. Good versus evil, order versus chaos, free will versus determinism. All assume fixed points in his mind, but the only thing fixed is the pointer in the moment of his pointing. The dream he clings to is not a lie, yet in attempting to objectify it, the mere existence of a point of view distorts all but the aspiration. The world of matter appears less muddled than our thinking about spacetime. At a molecular level, it is Heraclitus River that always looks the same, even while its water of whirling atoms changes with each glance. As physicists Bohr and Heisenberg concluded in their Copenhagen interpretation, subatomic particles have no discrete reality, only probability, until a measurement forces them into a particle state. Von Neumann and Wigner went further by arguing consciousness was needed to collapse the wave function. In Kantian terms, there's no actual there until one is framed in a perception. Schopenhauer agreed with Kant, but saw two critical omissions in his premise. First, Kant left open the question whether things in themselves could be described as things at all. If space, time, and causation are limited to perception and do not describe reality as it exists in itself, then objects which require these contextual categories cannot exist as distinct, differentiated things in themselves outside perception either. For there can be no space, time, and causation to separate them. Objects are not objects in themselves, but perceptual representations of something the observer can neither divide nor divine as a relational idea. What Schopenhauer called, outside our space-time causal vantage point, an undifferentiated noumena, or Kant's thing in itself. Kant's second fault lay in believing that this thing in itself was entirely unknowable. He failed to realize that, though lacking a rational understanding, we nonetheless are this noumena in point of fact. And what can be said empirically about our inner nature is that we will and are willed. Our very reason is a project of willing and wanting mastery, for good or ill, over the reality we construct. It is I, as a perceiving subject, that imposes duality where none nominally exists. This impasse is appreciated when, like David Hume, I go to look for myself in my thoughts, and find only the thought of myself looking for myself. I must be a perceiver to have a perception, but I can never know myself outside the act of perceiving myself as a perceiver. Mind and matter, hence, cannot be separated as phenomena or operations. So what remains outside the puzzle is only the insatiable will to deconstruct the puzzle. And this will, by Schopenhauer's reckoning, is hardly an object of our possession. It is the Ouroboros that devours itself in pursuit of its own dissection. The noumenal realm may be thought of as the last refuge of a scoundrel, in that the great philosopher sought to vilify its one definable attribute, will, as blind and rapacious. And yet, by the same cloak of invisibility, the fruits of the will, art, music, and fellow feeling, were deified as acts of omission and being miraculously spared the cowcatcher. Duality, even as a dissociative order, undid those mindful of its perils. We no more dissolve into madness at this paradox than did Schopenhauer. Through the firmament of our intuitions, we perceive more than we generalize in concepts, and conceive more than what strict experience provides. Whatever barriers remain in our limits to knowledge, they do not extend to separating us from our fundamental essence. We perceive reality as being something outside ourselves, but this is merely an accident of our birth. As children of Prometheus, we pay a price for having stolen fire from the gods, and for having forsaken our heavenly identity to forge another. Amnesia, every time we go to look for ourselves in our thoughts.
Schopenhauer, on examining the self as the metaphysical will's one genuine artifact, realized perception, devoid of utility and reason, puts us closer to a complete immersive experience of reality. And yet, even here, we confront not a wall, but a porous barrier. And the closer we come to peering into this barrier, the closer we must come to confronting our own mortality. Our minds create physical reality as a duality, where there is the perceiver and the perception as two distinct ends of an operation. But this is an illusion, and yet we sense we are closer to solving this riddle when we stare down the dreadful divide that reconciles this illusion.
Dear Grasshopper, man was chased into consciousness by a bright sun, even as the ashy shadow that bore him into the world stayed unobtrusively, for the most part, beyond the horizon. There it hugged the perimeter in anticipation of nightfall each day, and at dusk swept down from its perch with wings bigger than the world. Why do we love God and fear Him at the same time? Why do we stand in awe of storms, even as they swallow our houses and families? It is because such holy perceptual moments expose our reason for what it is, a means and not an end. When calamity strikes, we peer into the blazing blue sky and see it for the first time. We feel our skin, our souls, our very marrow. We are drawn to the flame that burns us, that tears away our mortality and our reason. We think if we can glimpse behind the thunderbolts that destroy us, we will see the hand of God letting go.